North Africa is not exactly known as the most peaceful region in the world, but amidst a chaotic backdrop of military coups, devastating civil wars, deep social unrest, and a general devastating lack of regional stability, there is a single country which has not only persevered, but actively thrived against all odds. Welcome to Morocco, the lone African nation that has successfully maintained absolute peace and maximized its economic prosperity since its modern inception. But how is this even possible? Why is Morocco so remarkably peaceful while its immediate neighbors continually fall into brutal wars and systemic collapse? As usual, it doesn't happen by accident. It all starts with the country's highly unique, deeply protective, and surprisingly diverse geography, a natural fortress that has shielded this kingdom for centuries. If you want to help us uncover more hidden geographic anomalies across the globe, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to GeoAtlas right now. Because to truly understand Morocco's modern geopolitical triumph, we have to look closely at the terrifyingly rugged wall that isolates it from the rest of the continent. Morocco, a country strategically perched directly at the northwestern edge of Africa, is absolutely striking in its geography. In fact, its unique position, bridging the Atlantic Ocean and the Mediterranean Sea and serving as the westernmost gateway to the vast Sahara Desert from Europe, has sculpted a complex landscape that possesses a surprising amount of variability, from temperate coastlines to arid interior, and from towering mountains to expansive plains. Basically, contrary to popular belief, it's not all desert. At the very heart of Morocco's physical geography lies its formidable mountain ranges. The Atlas Mountains, a majestic chain that runs diagonally across the country from northeast to southwest, acts as a critical natural spinal column for the country. And this massive mountain range is further divided into three distinct, powerful sections. First, the High Atlas, home to North Africa's highest peak, Jebel Toubkal, which rises to a staggering altitude of over 4,000 meters and forms a significant physical barrier to its north. Second, the Middle Atlas trends in a more northerly direction, characterized by a lush mix of ancient cedar forests and high plateaus. Finally, the Anti-Atlas extends southwestward towards the Atlantic, acting as a more barren, rugged, and arid range. These mountains are not mere geologic features. They actively influence everything from Morocco's climate and hydrology, trapping moisture from heavy Atlantic storms on their western slopes, to directly dictating where human civilizations have settled and established massive modern cities. Also, here is an incredible historic fact. The Atlas Mountains of North Africa and the Appalachian Mountains of North America are technically part of the exact same mountain range, split apart when the continents tore away from each other around 200 million years ago. North of the Atlas Mountains, running tightly along the Mediterranean coast, lie the Rif Mountains. This crescent-shaped range, which belongs to the same geological system as Spain's Sierra Nevada, rises sharply from a narrow coastal plain. While generally lower than the High Atlas, the Rif also contributes immensely to Morocco's diverse microclimates, with its northern slopes receiving substantial rainfall. In fact, some of these northern parts of Morocco can get as much as 60 inches of rain per year, along with abundant snowfall in the higher elevations, completely pushing back against Morocco's dry and sandy global reputation. Between these dominant mountain systems and extending all the way towards the Atlantic Ocean are Morocco's vital coastal plains and plateaus. These regions, particularly the extensive Gharb Plain in the northwest and the Moroccan Plateau to the south of Casablanca, are characterized by highly fertile soils, making them the undisputed agricultural heartland of the entire country. This geographic blessing, in turn, supports a significant portion of the population and feeds much of its modern commercial agriculture. Here, the moderating, cool influence of the Atlantic Ocean is keenly felt, resulting in mild temperatures and a generally more humid climate than the deep interior. Finally, moving all the way east and south from the protective shield of the Atlas Mountains, the landscape drastically turns into the vast, unforgiving, arid expanse of the Sahara Desert. Ironically, this is the exact part of the country that most people globally associate with Morocco. And this is precisely because the towering Atlas Mountains create a distinct, brutal rain shadow effect. This means that the land immediately to their east receives significantly less rainfall, leading to the abrupt, harsh onset of extreme desert conditions. This overwhelming Saharan influence has a huge impact on the climate, where temperatures can become increasingly extreme with scorching hot days and brutally cold nights. Yet, while seemingly inhospitable, this desert landscape is strategically punctuated by lush oases, verdant pockets of life sustained by deep underground water sources, which have historically been crucial for ancient trade routes and local communities. Morocco's climate is infinitely more varied than you might think, and certainly more so than popular culture has made it out to be. And this geographic diversity has inevitably led to the exact way in which the country was settled, developed, colonized, and ultimately engineered into the powerful modern nation it is today. But this geographical paradise hides a massive logistical problem. Because while Morocco has the perfect natural walls, it shares a highly volatile, completely closed land border that threatens its stability every single day. Morocco is simultaneously a profoundly ancient empire and a remarkably modern country. It is an incredibly complex, multi-layered story of how this strategic nation even managed to come into modern existence, especially when considering the deeply complicated, often bloody history Morocco shares with its northern European neighbor, Spain. Their extreme geographic proximity, separated by just a narrow 4-kilometer strip of water via the Strait of Gibraltar, has single-handedly ensured that their historical destinies have been permanently intertwined. In many historical ways, the history of Morocco is quite literally the history of Spain. The earliest geopolitical threads connecting Morocco to the Iberian Peninsula date back to the early 8th century. In the year 711, Muslim forces, composed primarily of indigenous Berbers from North Africa, famously crossed the choppy waters of the strait to launch a massive conquest, eventually establishing the flourishing civilization of Al-Andalus on the Iberian Peninsula. For nearly 800 years following this crossing, Islamic rule actively flourished in what is today modern Spain, leaving an indelible, magnificent mark on modern Spanish art, architecture, language, and intellectual life. During this golden era, spectacular Islamic cities like Cordoba, Sevilla, and Granada transformed into global centers of learning and culture, serving as a critical scientific bridge for priceless knowledge from the Islamic world to reach a fragmented Europe. In this way, the Iberian Peninsula successfully avoided the intellectual dark ages that much of continental Europe was still reeling from. In fact, the territories that would eventually forge the Kingdom of Spain looked and felt much more like the sophisticated Islamic Idrisid dynasty across the strait than the raw, early origins of the neighboring Carolingian Empire, which would later become France. However, the geopolitical tide turned permanently with the centuries-long Christian Reconquista, which definitively culminated in 1492 with the tragic fall of Granada, the very last Muslim stronghold in Spain. This historic year marked a massive macro shift, as the newly unified Christian kingdoms immediately began expanding their military influence southward across the Mediterranean, aggressively establishing heavily fortified naval footholds along the strategic Moroccan coastline. Spain's geopolitical interest in Morocco only intensified over the centuries, systematically driven by deep strategic anxieties over the control of the Strait of Gibraltar and a relentless desire to dominate the hyper-valuable trade routes filtering from the Atlantic Ocean into the Mediterranean Sea. By the late 1800s and early 1900s, as aggressive European powers violently carved up the African continent during the infamous Scramble for Africa, Morocco naturally became a volatile focal point of imperial rivalries. Despite its proud, long history as a highly resilient, independent sultanate, growing internal weaknesses and crushing external pressures inevitably led to its forced partitioning. In 1912, the highly controversial Treaty of Fez formally established a dominant French protectorate over the greater part of Morocco. Yet, to satisfy imperial balances, Spain was simultaneously granted its own colonial protectorate over a northern strip of the country encompassing the treacherous, rugged terrain of the Rift Mountains, as well as a smaller, separate southern zone near the Sahara Desert. Meanwhile, the vital global port city of Tangier was designated as a highly unique international zone due to its irreplaceable strategic position. Under direct Spanish rule, the Northern Protectorate faced fierce, unrelenting local resistance, most notably exploding into the brutal Rif War. Led by Abd el-Krim, a highly charismatic and brilliant Berber leader, the fiercely independent Rif tribes mounted a devastating insurgency against both Spanish and later French colonial forces. They shockingly established the short-lived Rif Republic in 1921, an independent state that, though ultimately crushed in 1926 by a massive combined Franco-Spanish military coalition utilizing chemical weapons, became a powerful, immortal symbol of Moroccan nationalism and a direct precursor to the wider modern independence movement. Decades later, the Spanish Civil War of the 1930s saw Spain's Army of Africa, largely composed of elite Moroccan soldiers, play an absolutely crucial role in launching General Francisco Franco's violent rise to power, further tangling the political webs of both countries. Following the immense global destruction of World War II, a renewed, unstoppable push for decolonization swept across the entire African continent. Moroccan nationalists, organized primarily under the powerful Independence Party, gained massive momentum, fiercely advocating for the immediate return of Sultan Mohammed V, who had been abruptly exiled by the French authorities due to his open support for the independence movement. The massive popular outcry and rapidly growing domestic unrest eventually forced both France and Spain to completely reconsider their colonial positions. As such, Morocco formally secured its glorious independence from France on the 2nd of March 1956. Following this massive geopolitical domino, Spain was forced to negotiate its own immediate withdrawal. On the 7th of April, 1956, Spain formally relinquished colonial control over the vast majority of its northern protectorate to the newly independent Kingdom of Morocco, while the southern territory around Cape Juby was officially ceded later in 1958. However, a highly volatile, significant point of international contention remained on the map. Spain stubbornly retained absolute sovereignty over the ancient coastal enclaves of Ceuta and Melilla on the Mediterranean coast, as well as a few smaller, heavily fortified offshore islands. These cities, with their centuries-old Spanish presence, remain sovereign Spanish territories to this very day. For the government in Rabat, this remains a persistent, burning point of diplomatic friction and a lingering legacy of the colonial era, as Morocco views both cities as sacred, integral parts of its national sovereign territory. Since achieving independence, the relationship between Morocco and Spain has been permanently characterized by a highly delicate, razor-thin balance of strategic cooperation and sudden friction. Today, the two nations operate as critical trading partners, collaborating deeply on existential matters such as European counterterrorism and high-stakes migration control, given their shared, heavily militarized border and geographic reality as the ultimate gateways between Europe and Africa. And it is precisely because of this highly unique Western-backed security relationship with Europe that Morocco has managed to maintain such an unprecedented level of relative political stability over the decades, at least when compared to the absolute chaos engulfing its immediate neighbors. But this stability hides a dark, deep-seated geographic paradox. Because while Morocco looks west towards the wealth of Europe and enjoys the protection of its natural mountain walls, its entire eastern flank is pinned against a massive, completely frozen geopolitical wasteland. A border wrapped in landmines, trench systems, and an ideological war that has been quietly simmering for over 50 years. Morocco stands out in absolute contrast on a continent that is all too often beset by brutal political turmoil and structural instability. The country has successfully maintained a truly remarkable degree of internal peace and relative macro prosperity since its independence. especially when compared directly to the vast majority of its chaotic African neighbors. This lasting stability is by no means a geographical accident. Rather, it is the direct byproduct of a calculated confluence of highly forward-thinking, resilient policies that have ensured Morocco maintains its equilibrium, even while other nation-states nearby systematically collapse into ruthless dictatorships, bloody civil wars, and complete social unrest. One of the foundational, unshakable pillars of modern Moroccan stability is its long-standing, deeply institutionalized monarchical system. To a global audience, this might initially sound completely counterintuitive, because conventional political science typically associates prolonged peace and prosperity strictly with liberal Western democracies, but in North Africa, the reality is entirely different. Unlike many post-colonial African states that abruptly experimented with fragile, highly fractured forms of republican governance, often leading directly to military coups, corruption voids, and endless civil wars, Morocco proudly retained its central sovereign king, who happened to be immensely popular when the nation successfully reclaimed its independence. The ruling Alawi dynasty, with historical roots stretching back uninterrupted for centuries, provided the young country with a deep psychological sense of historic continuity, national identity, and absolute sovereign legitimacy. In this specific geopolitical design, Morocco operates much like a country like Thailand or even the United Kingdom, having a strong, culturally revered, and politically stable figurehead does psychological wonders for ensuring long-lasting national peace. The king, particularly King Mohammed VI, plays an indispensable central role as a unifying national figure, the supreme spiritual leader of the faithful, and the ultimate arbiter of all macro-political power. And while Morocco is admittedly not a full, uninhibited Western-style democracy, the king has strategically orchestrated a masterclass process of gradual, controlled, and top-down political reforms. By proactively introducing critical constitutional amendments and organizing regular parliamentary elections, the monarchy has skillfully allowed for a functional degree of political participation and even heavily monitored public dissent. This absorbs hazardous grassroots socio-political pressures that might otherwise violently erupt into wider, uncontrollable national unrest. This calculated flexibility contrasts sharply and brutally with failed states like Libya and Sudan, both of which have experienced catastrophic total state collapse, horrific tribal fracturing, or prolonged civil conflicts immediately following the violent removal or structural weakening of a strong central authority. Economically, Morocco has aggressively pursued a highly strategic path of market diversification and sweeping financial liberalization, albeit while battling ongoing domestic challenges. Crucially, the country is not a major oil or gas producer, like its massive neighbors Algeria or Nigeria. Instead of suffering from the infamous resource curse, Morocco was forced to invest heavily in world-class infrastructure, expansive renewable energy grids, and high-value, export-oriented modern industries such as advanced automotive manufacturing, international aeronautics, and global phosphate refining. This infrastructure gamble has successfully engineered a far more resilient, diversified economy that is dramatically less vulnerable to the highly volatile, unpredictable global commodity price fluctuations that have systematically destabilized and bankrupted so many resource-dependent African nations. Furthermore, Rabat has actively courted massive foreign direct investment and forged ironclad economic ties with the European Union, providing a solid degree of economic predictability and industrial opportunities for its rapidly growing youth population. For example, its robust, globally recognized tourism sector provides an indispensable, multi-billion-dollar source of steady foreign revenue and widespread employment, a structural reality that is a far cry from the absolute economic fragility, famine, and paralysis witnessed in completely destabilized nations like Somalia or the Central African Republic. In a crowning achievement of this logistical ambition, Morocco even opened Africa's first ever commercial high-speed rail line, an engineering masterpiece, connecting the strategic port of Tangier to the commercial capital of Casablanca, a massive journey that takes just over 2 hours today. Finally, Morocco's brilliant diplomatic strategy has been absolutely crucial in securing its perimeter. Instead of picking ideological fights or counterproductively antagonizing the West, the Moroccan throne has carefully cultivated exceptionally strong historic relationships, particularly with global superpowers like the United States and France, systematically securing high-stakes strategic partnerships, military intelligence sharing, and vital Western economic support. Simultaneously, Rabat has pursued a highly proactive, sophisticated, South-South cooperation policy across the African continent. This deep geopolitical engagement involves executing massive corporate and state investments into sub-Saharan African nations, primarily embedding Moroccan firms into vital sectors like multinational banking, telecommunications, infrastructure, and commercial agriculture, alongside smart diplomatic initiatives like targeted debt forgiveness and advanced technical training programs. This Pan-African engagement systematically fosters immense regional goodwill and soft power influence, creating a highly dependable network of continental allies and drastically lessening the likelihood of regional sub-Saharan destabilization spilling over into Morocco's borders. This sophisticated diplomatic shield stands in stark, undeniable contrast to the neighboring nations of Mali, Niger, and Chad, all of which have suffered devastating military coups in recent years, completely collapsed their internal security frameworks, and aggressively turned away from Western security anchors like the United States and France, plunging the Sahel into absolute terror. Of course, no realistic discussion of Morocco's structural stability can ever ignore the massive, unresolved geopolitical elephant in the room, the frozen conflict of Western Sahara. This expansive territory, a former Spanish colonial outpost, was formally annexed by Morocco in 1975 during the famous Green March, a macro move that remains unrecognized by the United Nations. The Polisario Front, a fierce Sahrawi nationalist movement heavily armed, funded, and explicitly supported by Morocco's arch-rival Algeria, seeks absolute independent statehood for the territory, leading to a decades-long, heavily militarized conflict and a completely frozen geopolitical dispute. Morocco fiercely considers Western Sahara a sacred, non-negotiable, and completely integral part of its sovereign national territory, and has officially proposed a comprehensive autonomy plan under strict Moroccan sovereignty as the only viable international solution. While a UN-brokered ceasefire has largely managed to hold the front lines since 1991, the massive defense infrastructure required to secure the region continues to act as a significant drain on Moroccan financial resources and remains the primary source of explosive regional tension, particularly with Algeria, which has completely closed its land border with Morocco and severed all diplomatic ties. Despite the ongoing Western Sahara issue, which remains a highly volatile regional flashpoint, Morocco has masterfully managed to contain its direct impact on its internal domestic stability. The central government maintains absolute, ironclad military control over the disputed territory and has poured billions of dollars into its modern urban development, aiming to integrate its economy fully into the kingdom's grid. The conflict, while an undeniable geopolitical and budgetary burden, has miraculously never triggered widespread internal civil unrest, a domestic civil war, or the toppling of the monarchy and central government, unlike the devastating, regime-shattering conflicts seen in neighboring Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, and Egypt, or the persistent, bloody insurgencies actively devouring the Sahel region. Ultimately, as seen with the most successful states on the global map, Morocco has remained so remarkably peaceful and strategically successful because it has maintained an uncompromisingly stable government and, more importantly, one that has had the foresight to not only liberalize its economy to global trade, but also gradually introduce controlled democratic reforms. While its immediate neighbors tragically chose to violently crush the will and economic future of their people, the Kingdom of Morocco chose to adapt, build, and survive. I hope you enjoyed learning all about the fascinating geographic shield and hidden geopolitical mechanics of Morocco. If you love this deep dive, make sure to check out our other video, all about why the Kingdom of Jordan has also managed to remain an absolute oasis of success and peace, compared to the chaos of its own immediate neighbors. Thanks for watching GeoAtlas, and we will see you in the next exploration.